Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out. And as I mentioned, now Christmas is approaching us in the new year. You have holiday show ideas you want to share about experiences, all of that, recipes. Feel free to reach out to me. And the best way to do so is through email. And I greatly appreciate those who have. And also, as I mentioned before, you, like Mr. Dennis and his appreciation for my show, and I appreciate him. And I will feature you if you're interested and to be on my show. All right, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on Speaker, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Deezer, just to name a few. So it's Friday, so I'm focusing in on all of you, which means this time I'm covering language, and this time I'm going to talk about the French language. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to get into the aspects of my thoughts and then get into the facts. So, French language. Wow, there has been just abundance of influence that it has had across the board on so many different cultures, particularly with American influences. From the aspects of Statue of Liberty, from the aspects of the cuisine. Sort of with, when you get the French cuisine and then Julia Childs herself, those of a certain company, y'all know what I'm talking about. But those who don't, she was a well-renowned chef and her time, she started, if I'm not mistaken, but she was a chef before the 60s, 70s, and so forth. And she specialized in culinary cuisine. And so, this just launched a series for her on PBS. She really made PBS what it is in the aspects of being beyond, education, when you get in the aspects of having shows like America's Test Kitchen, having shows like Lydia at Home. You have shows like this. It makes PBS well-rounded. And, so to speak, I would beg to differ about the aspects of the news well-roundedness. That's a whole nother question. That's unfortunately not. It's more biased there. But, that as far as the programming here, you have more of PBS was, cultivating its own and more programming other than education. Well, education in the sense of not being so stagnant. And, you can educate the people in the aspects of how to cook. And in this case, French cuisine. And I remember, growing up and seeing, when she was still doing shows in the 90s or so, and her having different chefs come on and, give their expertise, it was really quite unique. And so going on to fashion, the fashion houses that goes, without saying, with the aspects of couture and so many aspects about the French, flair comes about. In the aspects of wine, chateau, in the aspects of cheese, camembert. I think camembert is French. I'm not steak and brie, and it just, the list goes on. So it's really evident of how influential the French lifestyle is influenced in different specific cultures, specifically in American culture. So what does this mean when this is relating to language? Now, language, as I mentioned before, is the forebearer of, bringing you the aspects of what something is in a concrete matter, and how to express it. And the means in which it's expressed is quite different when you dig in deeper into languages. For instance, in the sense of American English language, English is different depending on the UK English and American English is quite vastly different. The aspects of how color is spelled quite differently from the UK to American. And the aspects of the syntax and grammar is quite different too when you are expressing meaning behind something. And then how this translates into French language and the aspects of Romantic language is quite different too. And then because French is supposed to be, it is in the house of Romantic languages. And that's in these things, shall come and bond with each other when you get in the aspects of Spanish and so forth, because they're all in the same unit. But it's quite different in the aspects of the origin and the origination of each thing. Spanish is, certain words translate differently, or translate, and they mean similar things, but they're not quite the same. And so it's unfortunate, and I'll wrap up in my point here. It's unfortunate, with all of this said, on the other side of French culture and influences, that the aspects of bringing the influence of how France is seen in today, and the language and the culture is seen in today on a more of a global scale, modern scale. There was the opportunity to do so, because the Olympics is supposed to be an expression of the highest triumph there is. And then when you make a mockery and you do all these things with the aspects of, what is expressed and what is thought about, French culture, and what is thought about all of these things with breaking down conventional thinking, what kind of path are we really going when we're talking about the continuation and the generational heritage of, the cultural value of France. So with this said, I am going to get into the facts about French language. Here we go. Okay, so sources will be provided for you in this episode. So I'm going to get right into this here. So it says, the origin of French language lies in the Gallo-Romantic dialects spoken in northern France, which evolved from Vulgar Latin following the Roman conquest of Gaul in the 1st century BC. This Latin adaptation by the local population observed significant influences from the indigenous Gaulish Celtic language, contributing long words and phonetical features such as the word for yes in certain grammatical structures. All right, the language was further shaped by the Germanic Frankish invasion, which introduced new vocabulary and syntax elements, particularly in the northern regions where the language d'Oil, forgive me for the pronunciation of that, dialects developed. So by the 19th century, this evolved to be known as Old French, which began to emerge as a distinct language, which marked the oathings of Strasbourg in 1842 CE. One of the earliest written language of Romantic language, separate from Latin. All right, so let's dig in deeper. All right, so French language here. And this is by Britannica. So French language, probably the most internationally significant Roman language in the world. At the beginning of the 20th century, French was an official language of more than 25 countries. So in France, about 60 million individuals use it as their first language. In Canada, also. And so in Canada, I know I'm going to talk about Canadian language. I'm going to talk about that next Friday. You know, that there's a cross breed to that, how it's really funny with the aspects of Canadian culture. You know, it's pegged as the friendlier, you know, imagery of France, of being French versus, you know, French. You know, you get the snooty sort of I'm better than you sort of mentality, and that's quite interesting, and to see how, you know, stereotypes really come out of something that is true, but in circumstances it's true. And so this is how we get negative biases about things. So, you know, the saying goes, two things can be true at the same time. So several things can be true at the same time. So what am I saying about this? So, case in point, you know, myself here. Now, I'm an African American woman, and there's certain connotations that can be with African American people, particularly women, angry, you know, mad, angry black woman. Now, just because there's certain type of people that are that way, that, you know, that happen to, and it also happen to be black, that doesn't circumstance that every single black female is that way, because I'm definitely not. And there's, you know, circumstances around that. And then, you know, the aspects of different cultures, it can connotate about that too. And so it's quite interesting. You know, when I was growing up, there was this whole thing where, you know, the ignorancy of it, and then the ignorancy in the Biden administration, you know, made that quite clear. So, I listened to, you know, rock music, alternative music, new wave, so forth. I still enjoy these things, jazz, and all these things. And so, I like certain foods, different foods, but how it's perceived, and I was told this too before, like, you act weird, you don't act like, you know, a black person, you don't, you know. So what does this actually mean, right? And this whole thing about this aspects too of male versus female, and the aspects of how, you know, if you're a man, if you're a woman, you're supposed to let, and I'm going to get back to a man. If you're a woman, you know, you're supposed to let the, you know, particularly going about, you're supposed to be very dainty, and you're supposed to be this and that. But there's one thing between being dainty, and there's another thing be just like a fumbling fool. And this was shattered to pieces when Dylan Mulvaney here was really being a caricature, and you know, really putting on woman face instead of black face. He he was putting on woman face and saying, hey, you know, look, you can just believe me. I am I really am a woman. But, it was an insult. And then having people like this on is an insult. And it's just one of those things that you got to, look at and not cross the line with and really pay attention to, how these things are being perceived. Because this also, crosses a barrier when you have the the abundant gift to be able to travel, and you go into these other countries. You go and you're supposed to experience these other countries, but unfortunately most people come with these preconceived notions and they don't really experience everything for what it can be for the other cultures, because they're already thinking about, unfortunately, these stereotypes. And there's something to be said when the aspects comes to that. So, hold on, I'll be right back. Now, on the flip side of this, and I'll get to the other points of this facts. Now, stereotypes come from a true place, right? And there's something that should be pointed out about that. And then also the aspects of not taking ourselves too seriously. But at the same time, do you really want to just base everything on something when you know the truth, when you find out otherwise, because it's just human nature to just say, do a general survey of something, say, oh, it's like this. Okay, then that's that, until you find out otherwise. And that's something to point out too about the aspects in it, which is irritating in the landscape which we're living with. Like, people just don't want to accept that biology and human nature, that's great. There's something wrong with being human. There's something wrong with biology and that of how the brain processes stuff and how we look at things. It's bizarre. But with all this said, let's get back into everything here. All right, so more than 3.9 million in Switzerland, and then, more than 1.8 million in Monaco, and some 80,000 in Italian, and some 100,000 in the U.S., especially Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, and some 1.3 million to add on to this. So furthermore, then 49 million Africans in such countries as Benin, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Cameroon, and the Central African Republic, Chad, Congo, the Congo, Kinshasa, Cote d'Ivoire, Djibouti, Ghana, Gabon, Madagascar, Mali, Morocco, Nigeria, Rwanda, Senegal, Togo, and Tunisia. Use French as a first or second language, and millions of inhabitants of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia use it as their principal international language. So meaning Creole French speakers to use standard French in formal situations. So the first documented apparently written in French probably dates back to 1842, known as the Strasbourg Oaths. It is a Roman version of oaths sworn by two of the Charlemagne's grandsons. Some claim that the text of the document is thinly disguised Latin and constructed after. All right, just making sure I'm still recording here. All right, and constructed after the event took a look into the authenticity of political propaganda purposes, while others suppose that it is Latinized tendencies which reveals the struggles of the scribes with the problems of spelling French as it was spoken at the time. So if the language of the Chartres Oaths is Northern French, it is difficult to assume what dialect it represents. Some say that the Picard, the dialect of Picardy, and others Franco-Provençal, and so forth, could be this probable language here. So the second existing text in Old French with the Picard Wallon features is a rendering of short sequences by the Perdunitis of the life of the Saint Iola prescribed. This was precisely around the times of 880 and 882 CE. So two of the 10th century texts. So this is the Passion du Christ and Vie de Liquor. Seem to have the northern and southern dialect features, while another of the Jonas fragment. It is obviously from the far north. So the 12th century, the gem of the epic poems known as the Chanson de Geste and the La Chanson de Roland was written. One of the most beautiful poems of its type in the world literature. It is very evident and certain that the dialect characteristics of the origins of which are difficult to establish. So in the 12th and 13th century, the Francine dialect became dominant, and it gained the status of literary language because of both of the central proposition of the Île-de-France region and the political and the cultural prestige of Paris. So the Franken dialect was basically a northern central dialect with some northern features. Before that, other dialects, especially Norman, which was developed in Britain as Anglo-Norman, while they used it until the 14th century. And in northern dialects, such as the Picard, had more prestige, especially in the literary sphere, and when you get into the aspects of Anglo-Norman literature. The legal reform known as the Edict of the Vils Quartets of 1539, however, established Franken as the only official language, as opposed to both Latin and other dialects, after it proved to be the most popular written form. From then on, Standard French began to replace local dialects, which were officially discouraged through the standard language and did not spread to popular usage in all regions until well into the 19th century. So dialects features which were still admired and cherished by the 16th century writers were ridiculed in the 17th and 18th century when the grammar and vocabulary of the modern language were standardized and polished to an unprecedented degree. Franken had largely replaced other regional dialects of French spoken in northern and central France. Those dialects made up of so-called langue d'oil. The term is based on the French use of the word oil, or modern oil, for yes, or is the standard standard French has also greatly reduced the use of the Octarian language of the southern French, the so-called language of the D'Oct from the Provenical, or Oc for yes. Provenical Octarian major dialect was a widely used medieval literary language. So French phonography is characterized by great changes in the words compared with their Latin parents' form as well as the continents in their other Romantic languages. So what does this mean? So for example, Latin sure became Spanish sugar. Let me say that again. Okay. The Latin secrum, sure, secure, became the Spanish segro, but French sur, Latin vocum, forgive me for that, voice became Spanish voice, vos, but French voc, pronounced voix. So French grammar, like that of other Romance, seguro. That Spanish word was seguro. Okay, so French grammar, like that of other Romance languages, has been greatly simplified from that of Latin. So nouns are not declared for this case. So formerly, they were marked for plural by the addition of s or is, but the ending, though retained in spelling, was generally lost in speech. So the aspects of masculine and feminine gender are distinguished, but are usually marked not in the noun, but rather in the accompanying article or adjective. And that's quite different with the aspects of Spanish. It is very distinctive of male, masculine, and feminine. Words, character, and traits and articles. So, we get el, la, and you get the base root, which is male, and then, certain things are changed to be feminine. And that's quite interesting how that goes. And differences between everything. Even though French is house in the Romantic languages here. I would say are distinguished, but are usually marked not in the noun, but rather in the accompanying article or the adjective. So plural marking in spoken French is often similarly distinguished. So the verb in French is conjugated for three persons, singular, plural. But again, although distinguished in spelling, several of these forms are pronounced identically. So French has a verb form of an indicative, imperative, and a subjunctive moves. So the predicate, imperfect, present, future, and conditional, and a variety of perfect and progressive tenses, and passive and reflective constructions with that. So it's quite interesting, the aspects of this. When you learn other languages, it's really true. Like I said before, when I was going to college, I had a friend that said, you start to appreciate your own language when you learn another language, because it's something about it. The other languages help your native language make a whole lot more sense. So, linguistic changes are more rapid and more drastic in northern France than it is in other European Romantic regions, and influence from Latin was comparatively slight through borrowing of Latin vocabulary, and has been great since the 14th century. The influence of the dramatic Frankish invaders is often held to account for the exotic features in Old French, such as strong stressed accents and abundant use of the diphthongs and nasally vowels, really pronounced, where you can really, diphthong, get in there and you can really hear the tonal differences. And that fascinates me with the aspects of how languages that express these things and their word form, verbiage, they mean different things depending on the context of the tone, and that's very prevalent a whole lot in German language, but specifically also in the Asian dialects too. All right, so by the 15th century, the language had begun to change in a sober, even more monotonous in the nation, a loss of a stress accent between the characteristics. So the popularity of French as a first foreign language, in spite of numerous pronunciation difficulties for nearly all foreign speakers is perhaps as much as the result of the precise codification of its grammar. So the edification, especially during the 18th century, as the brilliance of the literature is very expressed in all the periods. So modern dialects are classified mainly on the geograph basis, and most survive only in rural areas. So the Walloon, spoken mainly in Belgium, is something of an expert in it, and it has a flourishing dialect literature since approximately the year of 1600. And other dialects are grouped as the following. So Central, this is the Afrikaans, Orleanians, Bordanians, and the Chaponians. Northern, Picard, the Northern Norman. Eastern, Lorraine, Bulgarian, and the Francomites. Western, Norman, Gallo, around the Gallic Burton area, and the Aganvin, and the Matuya, and the Southwestern, which is the reigns of the Poitevin, Saint-Tongas, and the Angoumouse. So, I am going to end on that. So, this reaches the end. And I would greatly like to know your thoughts about this episode. And feel free to, people who are from France or who live in France who listen to me. And also, you are in other countries or in America and you speak French. Feel free to reach out to me and give your thoughts about this episode. Give your thoughts about the aspects of language, French language, and so forth, and its influence on our culture. So, tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. Bye-bye for now.